Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Hyperion Hub, your meeting place for all things Disney. Now your hosts.
Hello and welcome to the Hyperion Hub, and to our listeners, welcome back. We took a few weeks off for the holidays and the beginning of the year. I'm John Alois, and I'm joined by Sean Degenhart.
Salutations.
And John Redling Schaefer.
How do you follow that? Hi, guys.
We have a fantastic show to kick off 2021. But first, I want to let you know that you can follow us on all the major social media platforms. We are on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter, you can find us at Hub Hyperion. You can send us an email or a voice recorded message at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. We like to kick things off with our Disney views, and this week we have a good one. Recently, Disney announced that it will end the Magical Express in 2022. What this is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's transportation provided as part of your vacation from the Orlando International Airport to the Walt Disney World Resort and to the various hotels on property. Disney has not officially announced how or if they are replacing this service. They've only announced that they will be ending it. There's a high-speed rail option coming, Florida's Brightline, which could take guests to Disney Springs, where a station is being built. But Disney is ending the Magical Express after almost 20 years. What are your guys' thoughts on this?
Reminds me of the line in the Polar Express when the dad says, "The end of the magic."
That's what some people are saying. Well, that's what some people are claiming.
Yeah, and I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what comes as the alternatives. Now, if I remember correctly, before the Magical Express, or the Tragical Express, as I believe what you call it when you're leaving Disney World, people would find ways to get there from Orlando International. I mean, of course, it's nice to have your bags dropped right at your resort for you. You don't even have to worry about them. But I'm curious, once we get past the pandemic, is the minivan going to be the way? Are people going to buy tickets for Mears buses like we used to do? Just the tickets to and from? I don't know. It's a shame, because if they're still curtailing the number of cars they want in the resort parking lots, it's not as easy as renting a car, or, like some of us have done, drive from your location and park there. So it is. There are a lot of doomsayers out here, but we'll just have to see what their plans are.
Well, and I think part of the, vacations can be stressful, worrying about this, that, and the other. But part of the appeal of the Disney vacation is once you drop your bags off at, your airport, you're almost in the bubble. You arrive there, you don't have to worry about any of that, and even your luggage. And I mean, that was just a big part of the magic for us in just not being a stressful family vacation, especially when leaving, at the end of your trip when you're tired and have a tendency to be a little more stressed, just going back into reality. So I don't know. It's disappointing. I mean, it's not affecting the vacation itself, once you get there. But, just part of the magic. I think maybe a little hole poked in the bubble, in the magic bubble.
So you get out of the airport and you get onto that beautiful bus and that giant shuttle, and it has Mickey Mouse on the side, and you see those awesome seats, and those monitors are above, and they're describing what you're going to encounter, and where your adventure and your vacation begins is on that shuttle, and that's being removed. Now, can they still do something that will add to part of that mystique and that magic? Yes, but it will not be free, most likely. And I understand that, not everything's free. It's those prices are added into your overall vacation. However, there will be additional costs to take a minivan, or maybe if there's a special couple of cars that are on that railway, or if you're taking an Uber or a Lyft. It's disappointing. It definitely is. And, it was one of those things that I don't see how Disney benefits from this, because you're losing some of those perks of staying on property. You can get into the parks now 30 minutes before. There was nothing really new about that. I don't know if that's appealing enough to save as much money as you can save by staying off property. I'm not sure. I was disappointed. Everybody that I've told in my family looks at me like, no, they're not. Yeah, they actually are. And whether or not this is part of what's going on as far as cost-cutting measures, I'm not sure. Maybe it is. That contract with Mears. We used Mears before Magical Express, my wife and I did, and it doesn't come close to the experience that you have now. So, again, disappointing, but we'll see what they come up with. They haven't announced anything else but that so far.
I was just wondering, do you think a decision like this without announcing a replacement option, maybe they're just kind of weighing and see what the response is and then build their replacement off of what they're hearing that people enjoy about in the Magical Express, or maybe they'll reconsider. Who knows?
They've done things like that before. Throw up that test balloon, see what the reaction is, and sometimes the balloon comes back and it's all popped and they're not, they've gotten their message. I think my question also is, if it's not, is this now the change of a systemic transportation change? So we have left a Disney resort and been returned to a Disney resort on a Disney Cruise Line bus when they take us to Port Canaveral. I can't imagine that goes away, but who knows? I'm just curious to see if this is a groundswell change of transportation to and from the property itself, no matter where you're coming, whether from the airport or the cruise ships.
Well, I'm sure there's more to come. We have an incredible opportunity this week to speak with a wonderful creator of many things, producer of such films as The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and Maleficent, director of documentaries like Waking Sleeping Beauty, Richard Sherman, Songs of a Lifetime, and Howard, the story of songwriter Howard Ashman, author of many books, including Brainstorm, Yesterday's Tomorrow, Disney's Magical Mid-Century, and Before Ever After, the last lectures of Walt Disney's animation studio. I'm pleased to introduce Don Hahn to the Hyperion Hub. Welcome, Don.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here with you guys. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All these accomplishments and so many more, but something that was fascinating to me is you didn't start out wanting to get into filmmaking. I've heard you say the words, you weren't a movie guy, quote unquote. You were into music. Tell us about those early days and what led you into the business.
Well, here's Don's hidden secrets. I think I'm a little attention deficit, which means I'm curious about a lot of different stuff. And maybe you guys know the feeling. The idea of just getting stuck into one thing. I saw a lot of my friends going back to college that were like, I'm going to be a dentist and I'm going to be an insurance salesman or whatever. And those are fine professions, but I couldn't ever put myself in that position. The thing I liked most was music. So I was a music major in college, and I was a percussionist, a drummer, kind of symphonic percussion, timpani, xylophone, that kind of thing. And loved it, and grew up in a musical house, and loved Disney. Very much like you guys, and grew up in Southern California, went to Disneyland when we could afford it, which was $6.50 back then, which was not a small amount of money. And parking, for God's sake, they charged 50 cents for parking, which my dad thought was an outrage. But anyway, that's another story. The times have changed. But I love variety in my life and always have. And got a job when I was 20 years old at Disney. And suddenly that became my university. So I was around, I worked pretty early on with a guy named Wooly Reitherman, who was a director and producer. So here I am, the kid that grew up with his movies. 101 Dalmatians, Jungle Book was one of my favorite movies. And now I'm working with him, and I was just getting him coffee and just a runner kind of person. But I thought, boy, talk about circle of life and the ability to work with somebody like that. So even so, he didn't necessarily inspire me to be a producer. But over the years, I learned a lot from those guys and girls at Disney. And they were my school. And I thought I'd be an artist for a while and a painter. And I was an art minor in school. I thought I'd be an animator for a while, but in the end, I loved the variety of producing. I loved the variety of working with people. I love supporting creative people. And that kind of led me to just stay in that niche of kind of being a creative producer. And I've been lucky. I've been really lucky. I think a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time.
Talk about some of those mentors. You mentioned Willie Rutherman. Who were some of the other mentors that you had, and what did you take away from each of them?
There were several guys like Eric Larson. These guys were the Night Old Men, which was a moniker that they didn't particularly like because they felt like that disincluded a lot of their colleagues that were equally great contributors, people like Ken Anderson and Joe Grant and whatever. But Eric was almost a grandfather figure to all of us, and taught a lot about, not all these guys taught us about animation and art, but also about life. And I guess the biggest thing I learned was they weren't just Disney geeks. They weren't like our generation. They didn't grow up with Disney animation because they invented Disney animation. So they were very willing, though, to share it and very willing to do that. But when you look at their lives, they were expansive. They traveled. Mark Davis went to New Guinea with his wife, collected sculptures and masks. Ken Anderson, always sketching and on the road. Mel Shaw. Frank Thomas played exquisite jazz piano. Ward Kimball had a friggin' steam engine in his backyard and played Dixieland as well. Milt Kahl was a fly fisherman. So these were men and women who had expansive lives, and then they brought that back to their art. And that was the single biggest lesson I learned, which is you can have multiple lives. And yes, we all need money. Yes, we all have a profession that's chosen. But a lot of times we sublimate that other side of us that maybe we want to express ourselves with and just don't because we figure like, well, it's not important, or people would think I'm nuts, or it doesn't earn us money or whatever. And that was a big lesson from these guys. They really, really lived big. And I don't mean like in alcohol and drugs and all that stuff. It wasn't living big in a burnout way. It was in a, how can I be inspired by the world around me? And so Eric Larson, certainly, a guy named Walt Stanchfield, who was a great mentor to me personally, painter, kind of a hippie, lived in his van, when he was 80 years old, wore shorts every day of his life, always carried a basket of fruit, just a complete gentleman. So anyway, those were the people I was lucky to grow up around.
You witnessed one of the most transformational, energetic eras in Disney history, and I'm talking about the 1980s to the 90s. It inspired you to produce the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty. Before the hit started with Roger Rabbit and Beauty and the Beast, what was the studio like? Was it nerve-wracking? Was it exciting? Was it stressful?
Yes. All of those things.
Good answer.
Yeah, I think that's the simplest answer. The truth is the studio was fine. It was a dream come true for all of us. I started about the same time as people like Brad Bird and John Lasseter and John Musker, Tim Burton. We all started within a few years of each other. Glenn Keane. I started in 1976. So Walt had been gone for 10 years, although it seemed in many ways that he just left the building. The building itself was full of history and good ghosts, I call them. The smells, the feeling inside the building, all of my favorite movies were made there. And a lot of the people were still there. They were still there walking the hallways. So you could walk into someone's office and say, hey, what was Walt really like? Which I did. I walked into Joe Grant's office one day and he said, I think the best word to describe him is Walt Disney, he was an actor. He was a performer, a showman, but he was really an actor because he would go to your room, tell you half the story of Snow White. Then he'd go to the next room and tell them another half of the story. And then go to the next room and tell more of the story until he got people to react consistently to the story he was telling them. So storyteller, an actor, a performer. And I think you can see that if you watch him. So I was lucky to be able to get that kind of feeling out of it. But the movies were a little stuck. The original generation of Walt Disney animators was retiring and leaving. Their work was good, but not great, and certainly not catching the audience. They were, in some sense, had lost the audience. The movie industry had eclipsed Disney in the 70s. had become much more about movies like Easy Rider and things like that. And Disney made family movies and was not going to go down that path. And their animation almost died, although Ron Miller, who ran the studio at the time, and Card Walker, really committed to keep animation going. And because of Ron and Card and Wooly, the three of them, they recruited and they went to art schools. They went to, of course, Cal Arts, the Disney sponsored school, and really pulled people in. And if you look at the leaders in animation today, they were people that came into the studio around that time in the 70s and 80s. So the studio had lost its audience. You couldn't be caught dead going to see a Disney movie if you were a teenager. The movies were sweet, Gus the Field Goal Kicking Mule, North Avenue Irregulars, One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing. I could go on. So they were sweet movies, and I like them, and we watch them still, but they weren't. At the same time, E.T. was happening, and Star Wars was happening, and Close Encounters was happening. Oh my God, those were events, and we all knew it. Again, Ron Miller, to his credit, started Touchstone Pictures, which was a way to expand the brand a little bit. And the first movie they made was Splash, which was a huge hit, Ron Howard's movie. So changes were being made, but it wasn't really until 1984 when Eisner and Wells came into the studio through Roy Disney that it changed in a dynamic way, because they were real Hollywood guys. And so it was a little bit sleepy. Before that, you go home at 5 o'clock. You punched a time clock. There was a wonderful commissary where you could go have an hour and a half lunch. Many people drank their lunch. You had to get your work done before lunch because of that. There were several Mexican restaurants around the studio that were famously attended by animators who enjoyed their chips and salsa and margaritas, and yet they were great guys, great girls, generous, and I learned. And that's what matters.
But then you see this second golden age, and you're in the middle of it. Did you fully understand what was happening when you were making Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King? And like you said, there was a sleepy time there in the 70s and 80s, and there were some hits, definitely, but nothing like what we saw in those early 90s films from 89, with Little Mermaid on. You were a part of that. What was that like?
Well, it was a process, and I promise you no one ever knows that they're making a hit when they're doing it. Virtually every movie starts out with some form of disaster. And there were many movies building up to those years. So the young'uns, the guys and girls who came into the studio in the 70s and early 80s, were hungry to make their own movies and were good. There's really good people. And so movies like Fox and the Hound was kind of a transitional movie. Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston worked on it. Eric worked on it. But so did Glenn Keane, and so did Tim Burton, and so did John Musker and Jerry Reese and all those animators. So it was if you look at the credits of that movie, it was a cross dissolve into what was more modern times. I suppose one of the breakthrough movies that everybody wanted to get onto was Great Mouse Detective. Basil of Baker Street, we called it, because that was its name. And that was a fun movie directed by Bernie Mattinson, again, John Musker and Ron Clements, who were pivotal in that whole era. Dave Mitchner, great artist. And that was a really fun movie, and people were dying to get on it and get off of the main movie, which was The Black Cauldron. The source material for Black Cauldron is great. The Chronicles of Prydain, there's some amazing Lloyd Alexander writing in those books. But for whatever reason, it wasn't a cohesive idea and story. And so if you look at Black Cauldron, it's the punching bag for a lot of stories. I can't say it should be, but for some reason, the focus of those years is Black Cauldron. There's a lot of great work in Black Cauldron, but it didn't come together as a movie as well as it should have. But there was a lot of growth on that movie. Some of the first computer graphics on that movie. Some of the first computer graphics then in Great Mouse Detective. It was a huge fight with Basil and Ratigan and the clock gears. Amazing scene with computer graphics. And so a lot of baby steps were taken during that era. And then it was Little Mermaid that kind of turned a corner in a more major way. But still, Oliver and Company, Billy Joel, Howard Ashman wrote a song for Oliver and Company, a great stepping stone along the way. So it wasn't like a lightning bolt out of the heavens to change everything at once. It was really a process. There was ambition on our part as a new generation to say, we can we can make movies as good as Walt and the guys. Whether we did or not, I don't know. We can debate that. But we wanted to, and we wanted to at least make our version of what we could do, and that's what it felt like.
And I think music plays a huge part in that. I mean, you look at the songs from the Sherman Brothers from the 60s and, into the very early 70s. Mary Poppins, you've got 12 hits. And a lot of those movies coming out of the 70s and 80s had some great songs, but nothing like, the Ashman Menken scores, from Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. And I think that's a huge, huge element. And that's what Beauty and the Beast is what kind of got me back into Disney. I was in high school at the time, saw that over Christmas break and was just dumbfounded. It was amazing. The ballroom scene with Angela Lansbury singing and that camera shot of her dress swooshing when they're waltzing, unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah. But that exact scene is a result of a lot of accidents too. The James Baxter, the animator that animated Belle and the Beast in that scene, I hired him on Roger Rabbit right before that. And Roger Rabbit moved the camera all the time. Bob Zemeckis was constantly moving the camera, and so we got used to animating characters in a moving environment, all before computers. There were no computers. So James was used to that and brilliant at changing his drawings to animate in this computer ballroom that we had built. And even up to the end of the movie, we weren't sure we could get it done because computing times were really slow. You have more computing power in your cell phone than we did. So we had an alternate plan, which was to simply put a pool of light around Belle and the Beast and turn the ballroom off if it couldn't render in time. It was kind of an Ice Capades look, so that there was nothing but a spotlight on them, and that was our backup. But luckily, we actually were across the street from Imagineering, and we plugged into their system on the weekends and rendered, hours per frame. And finally, that whole ballroom scene rendered, and we were able to put it together. But that was, all done in 1990. It was all done, years before the Pixars of the world.
And so how much of a driving force were Howard and Alan in, really developing story and just, the creative process?
Well, Howard was the driver. And we all listened to him. It's not to say our directors and that we were passive about collaborating with him, but Howard was a collaborator, but he also was very vocal about what he wanted. And you could absolutely push back. Nice guy, and you could push back, but you better bring your A game because he was kind of a trial attorney. He could state the reason why his idea was correct and then give you 3 or 4 perhaps musical theater examples of why he was correct. And then we would have to go home that night and look it up. Like he would say, Gaston's exactly like Milas Gloriosus, and funny thing happened to the way of the form. And we would all go, yes, exactly like that. And then we would go home and go, what the Milas Gloriosus? Oh, yeah, he's like this vain, heroic warrior kind of guy. That's what Gaston's based on. So it was an education.
And that was before YouTube.
Yeah, it was, Stone Ages. Howard was well educated. He went to Indiana University and had his master's in musical theater and theater from Indiana. Was an actor, but primarily a writer and director. And so before he came to us, he wrote and directed Little Shop of Horrors and Smile on Broadway. So he was the full package, and we learned a lot from him. And I venture to say he learned a lot from us.
Well, and we mentioned, earlier here talking about resilience and the drive to make the next great one, and sometimes it doesn't happen. I'm not sure all of our listeners have had access to a wonderful article put together in the most recent Disney Files by an author you may know, Don, yourself, about the fact that if I say the words, we're toast, does that somehow maybe not bring back great memories, but still, show that it's okay to have that drive, to have that resilience, and there's a way to find that success?
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan asked me to write an article for Disney Files magazine, and I guess the moral of the story is we're always failing a lot, and that Disney is people. that it looks like this insurmountable behemoth of a company, and it is. But behind that big logo and everything else is just a bunch of people, often quite afraid of trying to do their best work and trying to do something that excites you as an audience. And but along the way, there's a lot of failure, and Beauty and the Beast fell apart early on completely. We had finished about 20 minutes of it, and showed it to our executives, and they said, this just isn't firing off. The exact quote was, "It's time to fish or cut bait," and we did. We threw it all out and started over again, and that's when we brought Howard on. It was not a musical before that. Howard was a master at telling stories in music, and his secret, which is not a secret, but it's the tradition of American musical theater, which is a wonderful American art form, is you put the ultimate moments of passion and humor and emotion and villainy in the songs. You don't just stop and sing a song while you're walking to the store. You sing a song when you are so hungry and you haven't had a meal in a week and you can't wait to go to the store, but you have no money. And that's when you sing your song. The passions are so great that you can't say it anymore. You have to sing it. And so that's something we did with all those movies. And if you look at the songs, look at the Ursula's songs from Little Mermaid. Ariel doesn't even know Ursula exists at the beginning of that song. And 3 minutes later, she's signing away her voice to Ursula. At the beginning of Gaston's song in Beauty and the Beast, it is the same way. Gaston and Belle meet out in the courtyard in front of her house. And the town doesn't know there's a beast up in the woods. They think Maurice is crazy for saying so. And then all of a sudden, there is a beast, all in the context of the song. We see him in the mirror. He riles up the town. They all grab torches and go up to kill the beast, and the song ends the last note at the front door of the castle as the door swings open 3 minutes later. That's brilliant, and that's great musical theater. And that's Howard and Alan.
You mentioned Howard Ashman and the wonderful documentary that you created. And you've created other ones, not just for Disney. How do you approach a documentary as opposed to a scripted narrative movie?
Well, a story is a story, and whether it's true or not is a story, and it has all the same elements. And so, the elements are a series, a character whose life is pretty normal, just another day. This is kind of a typical story. And then one day, everything changes and something happens in that person's life, and everything usually goes wrong. And then it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then that character's worst fears finally come out. And then that character is left with a choice of facing those fears or giving up and going home. And in a lot of the Disney movies, the character does face those fears and stands up to the worst fears they have. This, by the way, is not just Disney. It's also King Arthur. When the Knights of the Round Table are dispatched to go find the Grail, they need to go find it by the path least traveled, by the darkest part of the forest. Go into that forest that you've never been to, that you're afraid of. That's where you'll find the Grail. That's a really cool example of what a good story is, because out of our worst fears comes our greatest moments. So whether it's a documentary or not, so with Howard Ashman's story, even with animals, with some of the Disney nature movies, those are all very humanized stories. Who knows what a fish thinks, or a chimpanzee? But we put human allegory onto animals all the time and have for thousands of years. And so those are all the same. Those are all the stories. Those are all, it's the same. There's a few differences. A love story, you might have a guy and a girl, normal day, when they meet from across a room, they go head over heels over each other and fall in love and soar above the clouds until something goes wrong and they break up and they decide to never speak again. And then it gets worse, and then it gets worse and worse, until they bury their ego and decide to talk one more time and realize they really did love each other and fall in love forever. We love that story. We will listen to that story again and again and again. And we do. And so that's why I love telling stories, regardless of whether it's fiction or fact. And then that's, a lot of documentaries are full of fiction too. As a filmmaker of a documentary, there's a great responsibility. I was on the board of PBS for quite a while, and I got to know Ken Burns, and there's a huge responsibility for truth and for authenticity in his films and in great documentaries. So when he's telling the Civil War or a story about the Roosevelts, he does his homework, and he has a crew of people, and the research is correct, and he really tries to transport you to that time and space, and bring those people alive. And I really learned that lesson from him is in my documentaries with the Howard Ashman documentary. I wanted to have you as an audience sit with Howard and bring him alive for 90 minutes and have you hear him tell his own story and sit at the tables I was at and understand who he was and bring Howard back to life for 90 minutes. And that's how I approach it.
Awesome.
I just want to thank you for the Richard Sherman documentary. I'm a huge Sherman Brothers fan. I've been honored to meet him and do a little work on some of their music. And so it was just a treasure and a treat for me just to be able to dive into their lives a little bit more.
Yeah, you bet. That came about by accident too. I was watching Richard Sherman play at D23 or one of the Disney events. And I thought, boy, nobody's filming this. Nobody's even taping it. And then I watched him another time on the cruise ship. And then I watched him lecture with Tim O'Day and tell his life story. And I thought, nobody's recording this. And I was just struck. I thought, oh my God, this is going to evaporate. And it's like a library burning down when somebody, and Richard's not going anywhere, he's around, but I just wanted to capture it. So I called him up. I did not know him that well, but I called him up and said, he knew my movies, he knew Howard and some of the stuff I had done. And I said, would you be willing to play your songbook for me if I filmed you? And he said, yeah, sure. So I rented a small music stage on Sunset Boulevard where Frank Sinatra and Barbra Streisand used to sing. Got a big, huge piano, a Bosendorfer or something like that. And he came in for one day, and we practiced and set up a lot at his house, which was a treat. To go over to Richard Sherman's house is a topic for another hour. But, there you are. It's more than welcoming. It's in Beverly Hills. He's got Oscars around the house, but and his wife is incredibly lovely. And we decided what songs to sing because he's written enough songs to fill 15 hours. So we got it down to songs, Disney and non-Disney stuff that we would sing. And then I brought in some people from Broadway and the Dapper Dans from Disneyland to kind of support him. And we recorded it in one day and mixed it. And he was a part of the process all the way through. He came to the mixes and we got to be good friends. And I'm so glad I have that. And it's out there. It's out there on PBS, and I'm actually trying to get it onto Disney Plus right now.
That would be great.
How did you guys have children that are all interested in musical theater and stuff like that? How did that happen? Was it from watching some of these movies?
Oh, you bet. Can I just say really quick, I have to throw out a thank you. In fact, my daughter told me to say thank you. I've seen my brother-in-law play the Beast on stage. I have seen my son play Mufasa on stage, and I've seen my daughter play Timon. And those things wouldn't have happened, without creators like yourself working on those stories. So thank you very much for those magical moments in my life.
Well, and I have to echo that from a much, I suppose, somber side. Not about 8 or 9 years ago this past week, I lost a dear friend, and the way his children, it was explained to them, they watched The Lion King. This is what happened to, and so Dad is gone, but it's okay, and it makes me, well up every time I think about it. But all the joy you bring also means you bring life and understanding to even the hard times. And so it is that art, the way you express through the music, through the drawing, through the production, it is a complete piece. Yes, the music and all of that is just absolutely wonderful, but the deeper undercurrent of sometimes there are hiccups in the road, there's sadness, but it's okay, and there's a way through it. So my thank you is actually, maybe not the happiest of thank yous, but it's always a touching memory every time I hear the music, every time I go and see the Broadway production of it. It's tears of joy because I knew a friend. Unfortunately, I lost that friend, but I know his children are carrying on his tradition.
Yeah, it's funny. Those words from you guys are mean the most to me of probably anything. Certainly more than critics and then whatnot. You don't start out making movies for that. You make movies to entertain. You make movies to really to tell the audience what it's like to be human. And because of that, you can't shy away from the more intense moments. And you want it to be fun and funny. And so much of that we learned from Walt Disney. Walt Disney's movies, particularly his early movies, are full of drama and difficulty and humor and all those things. And that's life. You have to learn how to deal with those things. So to face those issues is daunting sometimes in the course of a movie. And we don't do it to, transform the public or create some sort of propaganda. But we do it because it's in the tradition of storytelling, going back to Greek mythology, going back to the Bible, going back to the Quran, going back to stories that were not written down, that were verbal stories. Because as humans, we don't know much about what it's like to, what we should do. We don't know how to fly south for the winter. We don't know how to give birth at nighttime so that the predators don't get us. So how do we learn? We learn from stories. We learn from our elders telling us stories, and in a funny way, Disney is one of many elders in the culture these days.
My oldest, 16, and she's a wonderful musician, but she's also an artist, and she loves creating movies and iMovie, things like that. So I just keep encouraging her, from reading your books and reading on Walt, focus on the story, no matter what medium you're pursuing, put it all together in the story, and that's where the heart is.
It is. If you look at great artists or great politicians, great actors, we remember them because their stories are fantastic. Religions, there may have been world religions by the thousand, but we remember the ones that have really interesting, enduring stories. We remember Van Gogh as an artist. His paintings are good, but there's other great paintings from people of that era. But he's the guy that, cut his ear off and shot himself, and he has a great story to tell. So stories pretty much everything. And the other thing now, especially to the younger people that might be listening to us, is there's never been an era as great as it is right now to be able to share your stories. The fact that we can talk and have this conversation, and the fact that how many YouTubers are out there? I read the other day it's like 1,500,000 YouTubers or something. How great is that? And there's maybe 3 or 4 of them that are good, but still the idea that you can tell your story and get it out there. And I'm not embarrassed to say I watch a lot of YouTube at nighttime. I'll just sit down and go, okay, what's on the news? Don't want to watch that. And it's either The Bachelor, Dancing with the Stars, or YouTube. So I watch a lot of, and they're great. There's great documentaries and great so-called amateurs that are making material that's just as good as professionals make in Hollywood. So it's a great time, regardless of your age, but to be able to share your stories with people.
Well, and that's a credit to you, too, because you give the credit to those up and coming. But part of the article, to go back to that, I loved, is that you were pacing like an expectant father when you, on a DVC cruise, you were allowing Howard to be shown on in the midst of the Caribbean. I loved the fact that you listened, and some DVC members are probably over the top anyway. I'll say it as one, but you listened to their critiques. I wouldn't have the guts to say anything to you that, well, did you really have to do that, or would you try to tweak that? But that's such a credit to you that, these people come out, moved, clearly, but yet you still took the time. What was it, after 3 trips to the soft serve machine, which, man after my own heart, but I got a thumbs up for that one. But, it's just a credit to you that the collaboration doesn't end with the quote-unquote professionals. And that just meant a lot that you listened, and that's amazing.
I do, and that is a cultural thing that goes back to Walt Disney, too. It's better to have you as a filmmaker or an artist solicit those responses than to wait for the critics to tell you after the movie's done. And so if you're working at Disney or Pixar and other studios as well, and you don't like something, you better say it, and be prepared with solutions. But the thing about showing it to the DVC members was interesting because they are kind of super fans, and I thought I really listened, because a lot of what I learned was while the film was running, and if people bob their heads or sniff or go to the bathroom, which happens all the time on every test screening, you know something's wrong. And they were glued to it. They were really glued to it. And I made an announcement beforehand that this is an unconventional movie about a person who's he's a gay man, Jewish from Baltimore, who wrote all these songs. It deals with the AIDS crisis, which may be uncomfortable for some of you as an audience. And I just want to say that beforehand, because I wanted people to have the opportunity to say, that's not for me. Nobody left. Nobody was offended. And it was oddly the opposite, because people were happy that someone was pulling the curtain back on a very vulnerable story. And I find that again and again. When we made Hunchback of Notre Dame, we were scared to death of the French and the handicapped community, because this is almost a sacred piece of literature. Victor Hugo, it's a character in a Disney movie that is deformed. What? And it takes place around the church. Like, what crazy people would take this on? But oddly, in the end, those were the two groups of people that were the most enthusiastic and the most embracing of the movie. So you never know.
That's going to wrap up the first of our two-part conversation with producer, director, author Don Hahn. Next week, Don shares some insight to his creative process. Until then, have a great week, everyone.
We're glad you could join us. We'd love to hear from you. You can email or send us a recorded audio message at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. Find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Hyperion Hub is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company or its subsidiaries. We'll meet you next time at the Hyperion Hub.